Welcome to our SocialPilot webinar. I'm Kadamni, and it feels great to have you all join us today. Let me start by saying that social media is constantly changing, and what worked yesterday might not work today. So, how do we stay ahead in 2025? It's all about real stories, the right words, and rooted videos. Today, we explore how these three elements can transform our social media strategy and help you stand out. It's not just about posting, it's about making real connections. Let's dive into how we can win the social media game in 2025 with stories that matter, words that stick, and videos that make an impact. Today with us, we have the subject matter experts, Sophie Lee. She has over a decade of experience in content, PR, and marketing, and now leads her own brand storytelling agency, Electric Peach. Beyond being an award-winning journalist and having her own social voice, she helps businesses become more visible and create greater impact through authentic storytelling. Then we have Katie Edgerley. She's the Director of Global Digital Marketing and Health, a leading community for global health innovation. With a strong track record in content creation and lead generation, especially in healthcare, she focuses on driving online impact. Katie has also built her personal brand from 0 to 20K in the last 1 year and has a wellness-focused presence on TikTok and Instagram. Pleased to welcome our guest speakers and all attendees to this fun and insightful session on Win Social Media in 2025 with real stories, right words, and rooted videos.
Hello.
Welcome both of you. So before we start, I have a quick question for attendees in the chat box also. And towards the end of this webinar, we'll come back and try to find out the true answer for the question. And the question is, what's the heart of storytelling? Do let us know your thoughts in the chat box section, guys. And by the end of this webinar, we'll try to figure out what exactly is the heart of storytelling.
That's a great question.
Okay, let me start by asking you both. You guys, both of you share passion towards marketing, and plus with your years of experience, what do you think marketing strategy is, and how do you guys personally perceive it like?
Do you want to go first, Katie?
Okay, yeah, I can go first. So for me, a marketing strategy is not only how you're going to reach your audience and achieve your business goals, but how you're going to resonate with your audience and keep them around for a long time and make them fans of your brand, basically. You have to be really, really clear on who you're talking to, what actions you're going to take to get them to engage with your brand, how you're going to make them remember you, what value that you can bring to them, I think is really, really crucial. And also where they are. So how are you actually going to reach them? Which marketing channels are you going to go through? There's no point marketing on Instagram if you know that your customers aren't on there, for example. Then there's a lot of importance on measurement as well. So what are you going to track? How are you going to track your success? And always keeping in mind why you're doing what you're doing. I think if you're not focusing on the why, it can be really easy to become unfocused on your marketing strategy and you end up doing things that don't really achieve anything.
I think everything that Katie said, and also looking holistically at your market, really, really understanding your audiences, the behavior, the evolution of your audiences, understanding how things are changing. As you said, social media, which is just really one channel in digital marketing, is fast evolving, but then so is the entire market. So if you don't keep yourself really fully integrated into your audience, into your community, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities to evolve your business. I think that marketing really needs to be running through every single part of a business and connecting all different departments within a business so that you can remain relevant as you grow and scale.
Yeah, rightly said. I think whenever any marketer hears the word target audience or target your right audience correctly or all of those things, probably everybody would know these terms. But when it comes to exactly knowing that what your audience is, so what do you suggest people in making them understand that? How can you very well understand your audience and not vaguely define them, but be very precise in who you are targeting to?
This is something that a lot of businesses miss, especially if they're focusing on social media trends or influencer trends. They skip over really thoroughly understanding their audience. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. If you're just looking digitally, you can use social listening, you can look at trend reports, you can keep up to date in what people are saying on the internet. But a much and kind of old-fashioned but still extremely important approach is market research. So really creating opportunities to hold focus groups or do interviews with your existing customers, with your potential customers, looking at big data to analyze trends on a much wider scale, and making sure that you're doing that really, really regularly, because the biggest challenge that I think businesses face is when they assume something about their customers or their audience.
Yeah, I would also add, if just making sure you're talking to your sales teams as well. If you're in marketing, if you're not doing the sales yourself, make sure you're talking to the people who are speaking with customers every day. What questions are the customers asking? What are their challenges? What do they need from your brand? And get really, really clear on those and how you as a company can solve those challenges, and that can form the basis of your marketing.
Yeah, the questions that your audience are asking and their challenges are your greatest content marketing tools. And if your business is if your marketing department and your sales department aren't talking to each other, then I think that you're missing a massive trick.
I also wanted to ask that, one would always feel that we have top brands in the industry, and they might be doing something different from us when it comes to following a particular strategy. So what you guys think, are they actually doing something different, or they are doing things the same but in the most correct manner?
I would say that the brands that I see that are doing really, really well are really clear, on their audience, like we've just been speaking about, but also on their brand story and what their brand is about and their brand ethos. And it's really clear to see in all their marketing what that is. They've spent time working out what their brand story is and how to tell that and how to get that across to customers in a way that they resonate with and remember. And I think it's that kind of repetitive nature almost of marketing. You don't have to do crazy stuff all the time. It's kind of landing that message over and over again so that it stays in people's head. That, I think, is what brands are doing really well. And then also, I think we'll probably talk about this more as the conversation goes on, but authenticity is a massive one. Showing that you are a brand that genuinely cares about its customers and you are real people behind your brand, I think is a great way to get people to remember you, to resonate with you, because after all, we are all humans, even if your brand is like a tech software, there's humans behind that and there's humans buying that software. So it's remembering that we're all people, and that is how you're going to get people to remember your brand.
Yeah, exactly, because people resonate with people. And the storytelling aspect as well is bringing your audience into the storytelling, creating opportunities for them to tell the story for you or be part of that narrative. And user-generated content has been around for quite a while now. And as Katie was saying, also creating that opportunity for your employees to get involved in telling the story is becoming more and more a focus too, because it shows that you're not just this faceless brand that's making something up, that you're actually living and breathing your values and your story.
Rightly, I think, said. Sophie, I wanted to, ask you this. So I saw a podcast of you, where you said, you put a very nice, analogy between marketing and a party. So
Yeah.
I wanted to understand that. What are your thoughts on that? And why do you feel that marketing is different from selling your brand?
I don't know if I think it's different from selling your brand, but I'll tell you the analogy of the party. So this is an analogy that I told on the Girls in Marketing podcast. And I've been working in marketing for most of my career, so quite a long time now. And one of the things that has always really frustrated me is that the marketing department is often dismissed as the flipboard department, or, oh, you just spend all day on the internet, or, oh, you just spend all day coloring in, and often deeply misunderstood. And that really, really frustrates me, as also having grown hundreds of different businesses of different sizes. So the analogy of the party, so you're throwing a party. The marketing is, how do you know who you're going to invite? How do you know what dietary requirements they have? What kind of entertainment you want that's going to be perfect for those people? What kind of venue you have? What accessibility requirements you need for that venue? The best way to send the invitation to them? The best language to use that's going to get them excited about coming to the party? All of those things are marketing. Essentially, marketing is the party. The going out there and handing them the invitation, that's advertising. Or the asking them to come, that's the sales. Or the, putting things around and about on the tables, that's the product, that's the service. But everything that makes up what that looks like is marketing. And when you start to see it as that, you realize that it's not just this tiny department over there that's writing things on a flip chart, which also isn't a thing anymore, but it's the lifeblood of the business. It's absolutely every single part of how a business should run, how a business should strategically grow, how they reach their clients, how they retain their clients, how they delight their customers and their teams, and use all of that to make a really good party.
No, I think I was actually very excited, after listening this entire piece, because, most of the time what people think that, marketing a brand is similar to selling a brand, but it's quite different when it comes to selling a brand. Marketing is more about, connecting with the audience, making sure that what they actually feel or they want, we are providing them with that only. So yes, that's why, it was great listening that podcast. And that's why I just wanted to, understand or reflect more on your thoughts there. Okay. So, it is rightly said that marketing is no longer about the stuff that you make, but it's about the stories you tell. So coming here to our main point about the storytelling thing, I want to ask both of you that how crucial is storytelling for a brand success?
I think so. That was a Seth Godin quote. It's marketing is not the stuff you sell, but the stories you tell. And I would argue marketing has always been about the stories you tell. And somewhere along the line, with the rise of digital marketing, things became a little bit confused. And now we're going back to the roots of what marketing and advertising and all of our whole creative industry has always really been about, which is storytelling. And storytelling is a fundamental part of communication for human beings. Our brains are wired to tell stories. We remember information far better when it's told in the form of a story. We connect with stories much better. We create an empathetic bond through stories. So it's not just that it's crucial, it's that it's the most impactful form of communication that any of us have at our disposal, whether that's marketing or whether you're a professor in a university or whether you're just trying to sell something, whatever that might be. It's the best way to communicate whoever you are.
Yeah, I agree totally. It's going back to that point about being memorable, just like Sophie said, as people remember stories over than just facts. So you can give someone a leaflet telling them all about your brand, they're going to forget it the next day or within seconds. Tell them a story about how you started the brand, why you started the brand, what you're trying to achieve. They're going to remember that for sure.
Yeah. And can I just tell you the coolest thing about storytelling? Because our brains are wired to tell stories, it releases all kinds of different neurons and different chemicals that are responsible for that connection and that memory. But the coolest thing is something called neural coupling, which is when someone is telling a story and you can see yourself or relate to that story, the neurons in your brain are firing in the same pattern as the neurons in the brain of the person telling the story. So you're literally connecting in your brain pattern. So it's that impactful that you can sync your brain to a group of people through the relatability of a story.
No, I totally know that.
Isn't that cool? I know.
Yeah.
I get so geeky about the neuroscience of storytelling. It's so cool.
Love it.
No, it's very nice. Yeah, on the same, aspect, whenever, when you see somebody saying something, you probably don't register too much. But if somebody is telling you in a story format, then probably you build a, visual in your mind, and probably then you make it makes all clear, and, you kind of more get involved in the stuff that the person is saying. No, totally agree with you.
Can I just say one thing on that though, because it's really important? It only works if you can see yourself in the story. So a story just arbitrarily about something that the audience doesn't see themselves in or doesn't relate to isn't going to have that impact, which is why it is so important to understand your audience before you start to build that story. Because even if the story is about you, really it should be about them. So even if it's about your business, actually it's about the main character needs to be your audience. So you have to understand their emotions, their needs, their obstacles to be able to do that in a way that's impactful.
Yeah, I think from here only we have got the term relatability factor. I think it has to be relatable to the audience somewhere. It should touch a core within the audience so that they could, feel that connection which we are trying to portray through our storytelling.
Yeah.
Regarding storytelling only, I just wanted to ask both of you. So, how do you differ a storytelling for a brand, and how it differs for from a storytelling when you do it for your personal brand or your personal branding profile?
Yeah, I mean, I can do this because I kind of have done both, and I think actually there's a lot of similarities. For a personal brand, I think it's a little easier and more obvious because it's coming from you and it's your stories. And I personally find it much easier to tell stories about myself because I know myself inside out and I can kind of express what I've gone through. But if you're doing it for a brand, you kind of have to sort of think about it in a similar way. And again, going back to the point about we're humans talking to other humans, your brand can be humanized, even if it's a corporate brand, there's still a story behind that brand. And like Sophie said, it's about putting the customer into your story. Like, how do they fit in? And what is your brand doing that is bringing value to your customers? I think you can kind of see like many similarities between the two. So if I'm talking about my own stories, I'm never just telling a story for the sake of telling a story on my personal brand. I'm telling a story because I think it will help someone that I am targeting. And you can do that with a brand as well.
Yeah, exactly. And an example of that is the brand called Snag Tights, which I absolutely love because they're such an amazing brand for storytelling. And it was set up by one woman in Scotland, and she's grown it to this multi-million-pound company. And her story is about the frustration around a lack of inclusivity and wanting to create something that was bold and out there. Snag Tights' story is very similar, but it's actually more like a movement where they've got all of these different women of all different sizes, all different types of communities to come together and form this big, bold, out there message about the importance not only of inclusive sizing, but also of self-expression and showing yourself through what you wear, even to the point where tights, which I think are the least interesting, least comfortable thing ever, become this iconic symbol. And that's the power of story. So just one person's story is one thing, but when you suddenly bring all of these others together, which you can do through a company, it becomes something so much bigger.
I think completely agree with both of you. Here, I also wanted to understand that have you personally worked on a content piece that you thought was like, a best way to portray a story, but somehow in terms of engagement or in terms of analytics, it did not, perform well. So what do you think that sometimes our way of thinking that storytelling or a content piece could work better, but it actually doesn't? So what do you feel or learn out of that entire scenario, and how do you come up with more engaging stories that people could also like or share or comment or play some around with those or repost around those content pieces?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've had it so many times where I've worked really hard on a piece of content. It's taken me ages. For example, a video that I've spent hours editing. I think it's gonna do really, really well. I post it and it completely flops. I think that is so normal and it happens to all of us. A lot of the times when that happens, oh, sorry. A lot of the time when that happens, it's usually because I haven't thought through what is the actual value that I'm giving in this piece of content. It might be a vlog style video that doesn't give any value to my audience. So I think it's really important to go back and look at your content with a really critical eye, take all the bias out of it. Of course, you're going to enjoy your own content because it's you and you've put time and love and effort into it, but try to take out that bias from yourself and watch it as if you've never seen yourself before, and really be honest with yourself and think, would I actually stop to watch this? Is this story interesting? Can I see myself in this story? Is this relatable to me? Is this bringing me any value? If it's not going to do well. So I think you have to be very honest and very harsh with yourself in your content, and that does get easier over time as you try different things. And you can of course look at analytics like likes, shares, views, and that kind of can sometimes give you an indication of whether people have enjoyed it. Sometimes content doesn't work and you don't really know why, but you have to kind of really dig in and think about it really, really clearly, and use that information to inform the rest of your content going forward.
Yeah, I think you've got to ask that question, why would anyone care, and be really, really honest with the answer. I have a story of when content did really well on the surface, but really failed. I was working for a big festival and we created these stories and it did really well. We had loads of impressions, loads of engagement, loads of clicks. Amazing. But we had absolutely no, well, very, very minimal sales. Our conversion rate was so low. So even though we thought we'd got the right story, and it, from the face of it, from the sort of vanity metrics side of it, it performed really well. It didn't at all perform well when it came to what the real KPIs were. So that was also another lesson in not just understanding the right story for the right audience, but making sure that that right audience is actually the right audience for what we're actually here for, which is to make sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it also comes to the fact, I also wanted to ask you both of you that have you ever worked on a content piece where you and it's for a brand, for a different brand, not for your own brand, and you're writing a content piece and you kind of felt that you're putting your feelings first and not thinking the broader audience or what they might like or not like, but it's your personal choice or your personal feeling that you're putting in the content. So how do you gauge that difference, that where to stop, where to limit your feelings, and then look at the broader spectrum of what exactly are we putting out in terms of catering to the wider audience?
That's a really good question. I think probably we would be lying if we said we've never done that. Like that's a big kind of lesson that you have to learn at some point in your career. Again, though, when you take over a brand, managing a brand, you should have their tone of voice, their positioning, their audience, and everything that you need to really get into the world of that, the identity of that brand. And there are lots of different people working on a team, and the creative team within that are responsible for making sure that they adopt the language and the personality of that brand. If you're not doing that, you're not doing your job properly. I've definitely not done my job properly in the past, though, because that's just part of learning and growing. Luckily, I think it's probably been about a decade since that happened. But yeah, I remember definitely making quite a lot of mistakes in the early days.
Katie, tell me something about your experience, because you work for a brand also and you also work on personal branding. So how do you make that difference?
Yeah, I think like Sophie said, it's really easy to make that mistake. And I think if you're creating the content yourself for the brand, if you're writing a blog or if you're creating a video or a piece of social media content, it's really difficult to not put your own personality and your own opinions in. And it's just making sure you have that separation. You are part of the brand, but you are not the brand. And like Sophie said, just really adhering to your brand tone of voice and style. If you don't have a tone of voice document for your brand, I advise that you get one, because especially if you then leave the brand or if you grow your team, you can pass that on, and there's that level of continuity. It's really important that that stays consistent so your customers recognize you and they get to know your brand, and they stay with you long term. I think for trying not to kind of put your own biases or opinions into your content, have that separation where you remember that you're not the brand, but also run it past other people, put it past other people in your team and get them to read it over or watch the video and make sure that they think it aligns with the brand. I think that can be really helpful, having a second pair of eyes to check yourself, because I think when you're so used to your own ideas and your own opinions, it's difficult to spot them when you put them in content where they shouldn't be.
Yeah. You have to check your ego a lot in our industry, I would say. It's a good place to go.
No, of course. No, rightly said, I think. Now, there's often a debate about trends and what works on social media and what doesn't work. And of course, the entire angle of making the content more relatable and humanizing it. But there are other things also coming into the picture, like the latest AI generated content, which is taking its peak. How do you think brands need to find that balance, that what exactly is working for them? And first of all, know that what is working for them. And if whatever approach they're adopting, whether it's going for relatable or humanized content or for AI generated content, is it really working for them? And if not, then how to find that balance between both kind of content pieces which are coming into the
market. Do you want to go, Sophie?
No, you go first.
Okay, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I really dislike AI in content. I think it can be really, really helpful for generating ideas, for creating graphics, that kind of thing. But I think to create content that really resonates with your audience and really humanizes your brand, I don't think AI quite does the job. And I spend a lot of time on social media, probably too much time, and I see a lot of AI generated content and it all sounds the same to me.
Mm-hmm.
Use it if you want to create a baseline, but then you have to go in and add your brand's personality on top of it, because if we're all using AI and not editing it at all, everyone sounds like a robot, and that is exactly the opposite of what we want to achieve with brand storytelling. You want your brand to be unique, individual, stand out, to really resonate with your audience, and I don't think you can achieve that with AI, in my personal opinion.
I agree completely. I mean, my background is in journalism, and I've been a writer for nearly 20 years. So it hurts me on a very deep level that this is even where we're going. But it's not so much that it sounds like a robot, it's that it sounds like the vast majority of bad writers, which is the vast majority of content that's on the internet. Like, it gathers all of the stuff that's been done before and then just regurgitates it. So it's always starting with things like, in a world where blah 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 blah, or like it's so many emojis, so much hyperbole. It always uses lists of 3 over and over and over again, and it's just bad, unengaging copy that doesn't have nuance or depth or interest. And that's why I feel like, please, let's not go down that line, because if that's the case, then it's like we've just given up on having any kind of creative, unique thoughts ever again. I do think it's really great for if you feed it information. So, for example, if you wanted to interview someone in your company, say you were managing the personal brand of a director in your company and you interviewed them, then you transcribed it using AI, like Otter is brilliant for that. Then you put it into a generative AI program and you asked it to use the language of the interview to cut it up and turn it into things, that's great because you're feeding it new information and it can give you some interesting, it just makes it easier and more streamlined. And then you edit it and you make it sound better. But don't just ask it to give you stuff that's already been out there, because most of that's just so boring and unoriginal.
It's the rocket emoji.
Yeah,
the rocket emoji. Like, no one wants, and also nobody ever says the word foster in real life. No one says that, but suddenly now everyone is fostering something.
No, I think completely agree. I think in order to use the AI also, one should also write the right prompt, what exactly is needed. For that also, you need a good copywriting skills.
Yeah, I think AI is brilliant as like a junior support, but it's definitely not your senior creative or your senior marketer.
Yeah, completely. I also wanted to ask, so we have all heard the term classic, whether it's a classic movie or a classic song or any classic piece of art. But when it comes to content, is there really such a thing as classic? Can content ever truly stand the test of time?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think, as we said right at the beginning of this webinar, content and social media is constantly changing. So I think it's difficult for something to be classic. But in saying that, I do think there are things that will always work. And I think that is like repetition. And kind of leading on from repetition, you can kind of think of your brand as becoming classic, maybe. So something that I'm finding is working really well on social media is having sort of a signature style or a way that you start every single piece of content. I'm talking more like video content here. So your intro might be the same every single time. You have the same kind of setup, the same, obviously, tone of voice, like we've spoken about, that kind of consistent style that makes people, if they're scrolling, they see your brand pop up and they know immediately from that first 0.1 second that it's your brand. And if they love your brand, then they'll stop and watch the video. And I think it's that kind of like doing those. I'm not sure if this quite answers the question, but I think you can kind of like repeat things over and over so that is like the classic piece of content. But in terms of content in general, I don't know if you can have like something that's a classic, especially on social media when it's so fast moving.
Yeah, I agree. Although I think when it comes to storytelling, I heard there's something like, and don't quote me on this because it's probably wildly not true actually, but like I heard there's something like 7 different strands of stories that every single person in the world experiences. And when you actually break it down, that is true. Like there's the hero's journey, there's the romance, they're all variations of the same thing. And in that respect, story tropes are classic, and they're over and over and over again. Like all Disney films basically are the same story, just told with different characters and different scenarios. So in that way, yes, but in terms of individual content, everything changes and evolves. But I don't necessarily think there's that much that's new, though. I think we get inspired and we get creative from other things that have happened.
No, lovely. I think I completely agree with both of you guys. So when you work on any storytelling, like or if you work continuously generating content for some of the brands you work for, and there comes a point when you run off ideas or you run off content and you start feeling creatively drained. So when you reach such a point, how do you guys still come up with fresh or working on the same feeling but coming up with a different approach towards the content that you're making? So how do you deal with creativity drained out phase?
I've just seen from Vicky, you had a really good point in the chat about having your pillar content, and as part of your brand strategy, you'll have usually 4 core pillars that then inform the specific focuses of how that brand communicates, and the content then falls into those pillars. I don't think you do run out of ideas, because you're not just going to have like one topic within a pillar and that's that. It's about, how do I tell the story of this topic, or how do I use this topic in as many different ways as possible? And that is when things like AI can be really helpful, because when you run out of ideas, you can say like, this is what's worked. How can we look at this in different ways? Or old school, you can just come together and like map it out together. But looking at things that your audience resonate with, and as Katie said earlier as well, going back to what questions are they consistently asking? What problems are they consistently having? What experiences are they consistently sharing? All of this gives you so much fodder for your content that I don't think I've ever had a period where I've been like, there's nothing else to say, I'm done, because actually there's always different ways to say it.
And what would you suggest, that should we use the same content piece on all our social platforms, or should we, tweak it a bit, or make it more platform friendly and then post it?
I think you can definitely repurpose. There's definitely room for repurposing. For example, I think it works really well to post TikToks on YouTube Shorts. There are definitely nuances between platforms, though. If you look at TikTok versus Instagram, I think they are still very different, although some people do repurpose content on both. I've personally found that something that works incredibly well on TikTok might not do well at all on Instagram, just because people are consuming content in slightly different ways. So you have to think about, again, going back to your customer or your audience, how are they consuming content? What do they like to see, and how do they like to be presented with the information that you want to give them? So on TikTok, it might be a bit more like rough and ready, behind the scenes, day in the life, like vlog style content. That seems to work really well. On Instagram, it's still, I think it's getting less so, but it's still much more polished, and it's more kind of room for educational or shorter videos with longer captions, that kind of thing. So I think it's just having an awareness of what works on different platforms, and how you can take the same topic or the same piece of content and just repurpose it in a way that works best for the platform that you're posting it on. So it might just be that instead of a 3-minute video on TikTok, you cut it down to a 15-second video for Instagram, plus the stuff that you cut out of the video you put into the caption, stuff like that. But I think if we're thinking about also not running out of ideas, I don't think you need to come up with different ideas for different platforms. You can take the same idea and just package it up in a different way so that it works for that platform and how content's going to be consumed on that platform.
Yeah. And also where your audience are, because they're not necessarily going to be on all platforms. And if they are, do you want them to just see the same piece of content across platforms? So it's about understanding the nuance of not just how they engage with your content, but who are they and what are they doing there, and what point in their day are you catching them? All of that creates a slightly different approach to how you communicate with them.
Yeah. When you work on certain platforms like Instagram, TikTok, there you see nowadays, like, there are more viral content which is coming up, right? People are going crazy about, coming up with virality factor and making up content pieces which like stands for like 10 to 12 seconds, and they want to push it as much as they can. And it's not selling anything. It's just the brand or the virality factor that they're chasing after. Now, when you work for a brand which has a little bit of a serious tone, or is into a professional space, and but still, caters to that virality factor, what you would give suggestions, to marketers who are working for that brand and catering to that level of virality?
I personally never am aiming for virality. I think depending on the brand, if your brand caters to everyone, then maybe, but I don't know many brands that do cater to everyone. So especially if we're talking about the more sort of corporate or serious brands, like you mentioned, you have a specific target audience. You hopefully know who that audience is. If you go viral and reach millions and millions of people, there's a high chance that a high percentage of those people are not going to be interested in your brand. maybe they're interested in that one piece of content, so they might follow you after seeing that, and then the rest of your content doesn't resonate with them at all. So then your engagement kind of plummets. I've seen this happen where you go viral and then you find you're kind of stuck and you can't grow and your engagement plummets. Not to say that going viral is always bad. I don't think that at all. It can be really helpful, but I think it's not something that I ever aim for. I'm more thinking about creating content again, specifically for that audience that I want to reach. That audience might only be 100,000 people. And if 10% of that audience sees it, then great. I don't need millions of people to see the content. You just need a handful of people to see the content, resonate with it, and buy your product.
Yeah, which is the whole point. And I think that actually that's where these conversations can get a little bit murky, because we're talking about a business that is selling a product to a specific group of people and doing so in a way that is valuable and creating value and creating a longevity of relationship. When you're focusing on going viral, that's often in the realm of influencer culture and being an individual wanting to get attention, essentially. Like, no judgment, that's fine, but it's just totally different outcome than as a brand. And and I've never had this, thankfully, but if any of my clients ever came to me and they said that's what they wanted, I would heavily advise them against that, because first of all, it's completely the wrong intention and completely lacking any strategic business sense for all of the reasons that Katie said.
I actually have had brands come to me and want to go viral, and I've had to do a lot of that educational piece to explain that's not the be all and end all of content and is actually not always helpful.
Yeah, and especially if you imagine that chances are you go viral because you're being divisive. Like, that's usually what happens. And so it's risky. If you're a small business and you don't have a risk management team to deal with that level of exposure, then that also could put you in a really dangerous position.
Yes, that's the point.
Yeah, but most of the times what you're seeing that brands, in order to gather more brand awareness, they go for content which is little bit creative and out of the box kind of a creative thinking that they need, and because of which they leave out on the aspect that what their core audiences, and they focus more on the engagement part or the awareness part or more on the visibility part. So there, of course, there needs to be a balance, that exactly coming back to the drawing board and understanding what your audience is. Like, you can't chase everyone, otherwise you will miss the one you are actually chasing to, right?
Yeah. I mean, I work a lot in B2B, predominantly B2B, and I don't think it's ever really a good idea to chase that and focus only on engagement when you're selling a service or you're working with other businesses.
Yeah, and I've also seen brands that are going viral or have a lot of engagement on social media. They're not necessarily making the sales. Actually, a lot of the time, the smaller B2B companies that are not going viral, but they have a very good, highly engaged audience, they're the ones that are actually making sales out of their social media.
Yeah, I've just seen the Antique Rose Emporium, exactly that. It's actually so much better to focus on building an engaged community and really understanding your audience and really giving them value, because those people, not only are they going to be your loyal customers, but they're also going to be your best ambassadors and advocates, bringing people in, creating that flywheel effect. I think I'm quite old school, to be honest. I find the whole thing like kind of eye-rolling that we're now just so obsessed with the metrics that mean absolutely nothing to an actual marketer that knows what they're talking about.
It's actually quite terrifying to go viral as well. I will add that if you have a piece of content taking off,
honestly, you'll get abuse.
Yeah, it's
you will get so much abuse. You could be saying something as like innocuous as peaches are juicy and someone will hate you for it. So like it is really
rude to apples.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I like oranges.
I think I read this study somewhere that viral content is like dopamine. That if you once chase it, then you want it more. Again, you want to create content which goes viral. You want to cater to that thing, and somewhere you leave out or misses out on the brand ethos that you're having, because you're just chasing the virality factor, not actually catering to the brand ethos. So yes, rightly said, both of you. Yes, of course, one should always look or come back to the thing that their brand is selling, not looking completely at the virality factor, for sure. I also wanted to understand that there's a common belief that when it comes to creating great content, one would require a very large team. What do you think about this? How can brands create effective, good quality content with like one or two helping hands?
I think it's about looking at quality rather than quantity. You don't need to create loads and loads and loads and loads to have an impact. And having a smaller team generally means you can't create as much, although AI helps a lot these days. And repurposing and all of the things we've spoken about already are really important. But I think that you can absolutely have a big impact with a smaller team. It's just about how you manage your resources and focusing more on the quality of what that output looks like.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And you can also, with a small team, always outsource if you want to have higher quality video or something like that, outsource the editing and make the best use of your team where their strengths are. So you can have a team of one making incredible content. I have seen that before, where they're creating content from their phone. They're using other employees in the company as well. I think you don't have to be in the marketing team to be part of the content. I think that can be really powerful as well. So using like employee generated content, get people to talk about their day, what they're doing in their role. That can be really interesting content. So it's kind of like using your resources and making the best of what you've got, really. I don't think that should be something that holds a brand back, especially smaller businesses. Don't think, oh, I can't create great content because I don't have a big team. Just try and see what you can do.
Yeah, and it really doesn't have to be high production value. It has to be relatable and engaging or insightful or educational or something with some substance to it. It doesn't really matter these days how flashy it looks. So I would say just get started and get telling stories and see what resonates.
Yeah, I'm seeing more people engage with content that is real and looks like something that they can kind of do themselves almost. Like you don't always want to see polished content on your feed. I don't know about everyone else here, but if I'm scrolling down LinkedIn or something and I see a really corporate video, my eyes glaze over and I'm scrolling. I see a video of someone walking around their office talking about what they do and how they've grown in their career and that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, I'm actually interested. This is a real person just like me. So I think don't downplay the power of authentic, kind of rough and ready content.
Yeah, and equally being honest about your, for want of a better word, your journey and the challenges that you've had and the setbacks that you've had is so much more interesting than just focusing always on the wins.
No, of course. I think I heard this podcast somewhere where they said that initially when you started making content, when it was like a huge influencer and he was telling his own experience, he said, when I started making my own content pieces and I was shooting from my own video camera, probably the kind of engagement I was getting at that time was much higher than I set up the entire professional setup. And with professional editing and everything, then the engagement kind of lowered, and I was expecting the other way around. So probably people find it, they try to gauge that, it's when it's more corporatish or more like in like a studio setup, they kind of disconnects from the audience, kind of gets disconnect a bit from the content piece actually. Yeah, I think we got a very nice question in the chat box. It says that what is like the guidelines to use for hashtags versus keywords on Instagram and TikTok?
I don't actually know how useful hashtags are anymore. I think I usually still include a couple, but I think it's actually much more about the keywords that you're putting in your caption and on screen as well. If adding closed captions to your videos, that can be really helpful. Making sure that the keywords that relate to the audience that you want to reach are in your video somewhere in the title. I think that I don't have any kind of concrete evidence to back that up, but just from my experience and what I've seen do well, I see the videos where I put in the keywords actually into the content rather than hashtags have performed much better. Hashtags haven't made, I've tested it a few times and hashtags haven't made a huge difference, but that's not to say that they don't do anything, because I think they do kind of help with search a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about making sure, and it's about alignment as well. It's making sure that your bio and your posts and your audience all align with each other. And it's SEO essentially, just on social media.
Yeah, and it's making sure your hashtags aren't banned as well. Like, don't put kind of like viral. That doesn't tell anyone anything about your content. Make sure they're really relevant if you are going to use them.
Yeah,
I think we'll be going ahead, with the last couple of questions. So anyone who wants to ask any question, just feel free to, put in the chat box. We'll try and, answer all the questions, whatever could be possible in the limited time frame. But so both of you guys, you do your own content editing, also do your content writing. So just for knowledge, are there any tools that you guys, use for both content creation and content editing?
Yeah, for me, I use for video editing, I use CapCut. I think it's really good. It's all I need, because I'm kind of, for my personal brands, I'm only really making kind of like fairly basic content, nothing kind of really, really high production. They do have a free and a pro version. I just use the free version, to be honest. It gives me everything that I need. And then I use Canva a lot for creating graphics and kind of like infographics, carousels, like that kind of thing. I love it. It's so easy to use.
Yeah, because I run a design agency, so we do design for our clients in InDesign and then put it into Canva because it's just so much easier to use. So I use Canva and CapCut. I use Otter a lot because, again, like I say, like recording every single conversation and always using that as a reference point to transcribe them and come back to for future content. And then I just use a good old-fashioned keyboard, because most of what I do is still written, usually from my ranty brain, if it's my own personal brand.
I think Katrina in the chat box, she's asking that how important is boosting content now in terms of reaching audiences and driving engagement?
I think they're trying to make it a lot more important. And it's definitely coming into LinkedIn as well. Any kind of, if you want to get farther reach on LinkedIn, it's usually got to be some kind of divisive issue-based content. But if it's about your business or about something that's useful to LinkedIn's audience, they quash it, and they're introducing personal brand advertising. We don't generally work in, we do AdWords, but not so much social media advertising. But I've definitely, if my post is getting, or one of my clients' posts is getting quite good organic reach, boosting it has been really effective.
I think it also really depends on what you're trying to achieve. I think if you have a goal in mind that's very specific, and for example, it's not it might be sort of brand awareness and you're trying to target people who don't know your brand at all, I think it's more useful to do other type of advertising, like a really specific campaign on LinkedIn that is more targeted to people who don't know you, so you can give a little bit more context. I think sometimes just boosting a post doesn't give people that intro to your brand that they might need. They might need a bit more warming up. So I think, yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and what your objective is, basically.
Mm-hmm. Like literally everything with marketing it needs to start with what's the objective and who's the audience.
Why?
Frank has some really good questions for us. He's asking that why do some creators have the option to show longer reels and longer stories on Instagram? Is this regulated by Meta based on followers? Who would want to take this first, Katie?
Well, I don't know. I could be wrong, but I didn't think it was to do with follower number or who you are. I think it's usually based on location. I think sometimes they roll out features in some countries first, and then they roll them out wider if they go well. Like for example, in TikTok, the creative fund is in certain countries and not in others. I know that they've had reels be different lengths, and like they open up different types of features that I know that they've seen stuff that they've got available in the US that we don't have in the UK. I think it's geographical, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, you are right. It's not to do with the amount of followers you have. It's completely, well, I don't know if it's random so much as it just depends. And I don't even think it's geographical, because I know accounts that have had it in the same area and others that haven't.
Yeah, I feel like they test things on certain groups and then they roll them out wider if they work. I think that's how they usually do it.
Yeah, they probably have like a whole science behind all of it, but then they won't tell us what that is.
Sophie, we need to break into Meta and get some answers.
In my head, it's just got like loads of monkeys with symbols that work in there.
Maybe.
No offense if anyone works in that.
Yeah, I think we'll take the last couple of questions only. So looking ahead, what social trends do you both see in 2025, and how can brands use them to tell better stories?
I am already seeing a massive rise in, as I said earlier, authentic content, UGC, EGC, so employee generated content, I think is really, really powerful. Moving away from those kind of like stiff corporate videos or pieces of content that don't really kind of make anyone feel anything, and going more for, like we've been talking about all session, telling stories that really get to people's emotions and answer people's challenges and tap into what they're actually feeling. On the UGC and EGC side, I think that's just a really, really great way to authentically show what your brand does and what your brand is trying to achieve and the value that your brand can bring. I think with UGC, it's great because you get other people to shout about how great your brand is rather than doing it yourself. And then it just feels a lot more real. The other thing I think I will see more of is less influencer marketing and more like customer marketing. So getting people who are actually using your products day to day or your service day to day, and getting them to talk about how it's helped them or what challenges it solved for them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the optimal word there is authentic. People are, if you think how much time people spend, your average person spends on the internet, we know when we're seeing something that's just complete rubbish. And I think long gone are the days of manipulating your audience. I've always believed that was a terrible way of doing marketing anyway, but I think now everyone's sort of really hyper tuned into it. I read recently that authenticity is out and vulnerability is in, which is just like, again, a really gross marketing thing. But I do think there's something to be said about telling the truth and not trying to make it look like you don't have any challenges or you don't have any problems, and actually really showing your business as it's growing and not trying to make out like you've got it all figured out. Because people these days, I think, we really need to see something that's real and connect with something and trust something, with so much greenwashing and purpose washing that's been going on.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point about vulnerability and showing the kind of the lows as well as the highs. You want people to root for you and root for your brand, and that's how you get people on board. Because if you're just kind of showing all the good stuff, people, I don't know, people don't like that as much. You've got to be really real. And I think that when I'm consuming content, I think that's so interesting to see and to learn from. I think you can learn so much from other people's challenges, and also learn so much about your brand and about yourself if you're doing it as a personal brand, if you're sharing those challenges, and it starts some really good conversations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the other thing is that people don't like especially if it's a service business, I want to buy from a person or a group of people that I think are going to get me and all of my challenges and struggles, not someone who pretends like they're perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, just for our attendees also, and for my personal inquisitiveness also, that what are like your, inspirations what are the people that you look up to when you're, making or working on your personal brands? What are the pages or the, industry experts do you guys follow?
I love following Pretty Little Marketer on Instagram and LinkedIn. I think they are great, and Sophie behind it is really, really great. There's also a girl on TikTok called Alyssa, and I think her TikTok handle is Inspired Media Co or something like that. She has really, really great tips on telling stories, creating video content that's not selfish as well, bringing how to give value to your audience. That's been so helpful. There's also a girl called Mia, also on TikTok. I'm obsessed with TikTok. I'm really sorry. Her handle's Floofy Socials, FLOOFY Socials. She has amazing video editing tips, and most of the stuff that she tells you, you can kind of do on really basic video editing platforms. So that's been really helpful. And then in terms of brands, I really like Currys, as in the like tech hardware store.
I love them.
Their content. It is just so good. If you're looking for inspiration of what to do, if you're a brand that wants to leverage employees, look at that. They're just smashing it. It's so good.
Yeah, they would be from a brand's perspective, they would be my favorite. And as I said earlier, snag tights are great at user-generated content and bringing your audience in to tell the story. And they're not polished in any way, shape, or form. So it shows that you can become a multi-million-pound company with a very small team without all of the frills and whistles, if that's a thing. Girls in Marketing are brilliant, really, really great community, and they've got great courses as well, but very, very accessible. Any others? SocialPilot, obviously.
Why not?
Katie.
We don't mind. No, I think Katie, since you mentioned that you're a great TikTok buff, so we have a right question for you from one of our attendees here. So, as many audiences and content creators scramble through this year's TikTok ban scare, which platforms do you feel are going to be big in 2025?
Yeah, this TikTok ban, it really made me laugh when it disappeared for what was it, 6 hours or something. So I'm so skeptical about whether it will ever actually go away, but obviously we do have to think that that could be a reality. At the time when we really did think it was going to go away forever, in the US, a lot of people were talking about moving over to YouTube because YouTube has YouTube Shorts, which is very similar. I don't think it is quite the same in terms of capturing people's attention for a long amount of time, which is maybe a good thing because I mean TikTok doom scrolling is horrendous. But I think, yeah, a lot of creators and brands were moving over to YouTube. I think Instagram is still obviously a massive one, although the content, as explained earlier, is kind of packaged up differently and consumed differently. I think Instagram's huge still and only growing. So those would be the kind of the main ones. I did hear of some other platforms that I actually can't remember the name of now that were completely new, that people were kind of hopping onto. But I think
Blue Sky is the one that is coming as a kickback to the horrificness that is Meta.
Right.
No, I think now we'll be coming back to our last question. What we, asked our attendees at the start of the webinar. So what you both think that the heart of storytelling is?
The heart of storytelling is the human experience. And the reason why stories are so impactful is because we all really just want to be seen and heard. And when we can connect with one another, even when we're so different and everything else in our lives seems so different, we can connect with one another through the shared experience that we can access through a story.
Yeah, and for me it was emotion, putting real emotion into your stories and being aware of the audience's emotions as well, and being able to tap into those, not in a manipulative way, but in a really kind of understanding way. You understand where they're coming from, and you understand the challenges that they face, and the emotions around those challenges. Being able to put that across in your content can make you a really reliable and trustworthy brand that people want to follow forever.
That's it. I think thank you so much, guys, for doing this session with us. It was very insightful. All of us really found the session very helpful and probably would be taking so many learnings back home. And thank you all to our attendees for being patient with us. Sadly, we weren't able to fit in all the questions in this short session. Therefore, request you to join our Slack community. My teammate Aditi will help in seamless onboarding. We'll also have our speakers join the community to answer most of the questions. You can also DM us your questions or directly send them to our speakers on their LinkedIn channel. We just want no questions to remain unanswered. We have dropped also all the links to our social platforms to follow us, especially SocialPilot LinkedIn page for all the updates. You would also be receiving the feedback form after the webinar. We will be more than happy to hear your feedbacks. Also, feel free to post your learnings from the session on your social platforms, tagging SocialPilot and our speakers. We would love to hear your part of the learnings. And last but not the least, thank you to my dear speakers and also to my team, Aditi and Jitul, for being the constant support. Thank you, Katie and Sophie, for being such wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely do connect with us.